all very welcome. I'm Noeline Fox, and I'm a PhD student here with the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, and on behalf of Professor Gerard Quinn and the Centre, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for coming. I'm not speaking loud enough. I suppose the most important thing is I'm here to introduce Dr. Michael Kendrick. I was trying to think, how would I introduce him? And I think it's fair to say that Michael would be, I would consider Michael to be a pioneer in the development of services and supports for people with disability, particularly people with more significant disabilities across the globe. He has been a major catalyst for change and for the evolution of services in this country and across Europe and North America and Australia in particular, and he tells me now he's just back from or just going to India, so his influence is spreading. I first met Michael, I think it probably is about 8 to 10 years ago, when he ran a workshop here, a week-long workshop here in Galway on individual service design. And I was one of maybe 20 people or 30 people who participated during that week. We were all people working in the area of disability services, either directly or maybe with the HSE or other organisations. And I think it's fair to say that that was transformative for all of us involved. It was a real eye-opener, because I think his key messages were, and continue to be, that we are all more alike than we are unalike, and that there is no need for us to separate people out on the basis of whatever their particular things about them, that we all belong in and we are all part of the community, but we don't need to put people in separate special places. So, and I think one of the things, well, two of the important things that Michael did during that week and continues to do is that he challenged us to think about how it is that our services and our systems operate to enable people to live decent, ordinary, good lives in the community, or operate to do the reverse. But probably more importantly, I think he challenges us to think about how we think about people with disabilities. Do we think about people as being different and separate and needing something different from what we need? So I think his benchmark would always be, when thinking about any person with a disability, what is it that everybody else of that age group or that everybody else in that community want in their lives at this particular time? Not what do they need in order to make them better or to make them more normal in some way. Michael is Canadian originally, although he lives here, and his background, though he lives in America. He might as well live here, Michael. But he still has that innate generosity and modesty, which is a lovely Canadian characteristic. So he will, I'm sure, be more than open to having questions and debate with you on issues that arise. And he will be here, he said he will speak for about an hour maybe, and then open the floor to debate. I think you'll have a very informative and interesting evening, and I want to thank Michael and welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I wasn't quite sure who it would be that I would be speaking with tonight, so, and I'm still not. So it may be that what I thought I might talk about isn't really a good fit with what you're interested in, but the die is cast at this point. The issue of real lives in the community is an interesting kind of a challenge, because you can live in the community and not really enjoy it very much or benefit from it. So the whole idea that any life in the community is a great life would be a deeply mistaken idea. So many people would believe, well, people should be in the community, and you can be in the community and yet lack so much. So community itself per se isn't really the response to what people need. It's a much more complicated mix of things that make for a good life. So whatever we can do to focus on that is really quite helpful, because it means that we're really not just assuming that just the mere physical presence of people in the community guarantees that you'll get a life. You really have to look much deeper into what constitutes a good life have the means at hand to shape that life so that it reaches its potential. And it wouldn't be really simply a problem for people with disabilities. This is a universal problem that lots of people simply don't have much of a life for any number of reasons. Disability could be a contributing factor, but there would be many people in the community who are deprived for reasons that are unrelated to disability. So in a sense, it's good to remember it as a universal question, not just simply real lives in the community for people with disabilities. But having said that, we do live at a time in which people with disabilities are doing better on a kind of a big picture basis than we can find anywhere in the historical record. We really can't find a period in history that has lasted this long where you would see an explosion of life possibilities for people with disabilities. In other words, if you said, what are the things that people with disabilities are doing with their life in 2012, would be immensely broader, more comprehensive, dramatically so than even a generation back. And as much as we would be very unhappy with the progress we're not making, it is should be heartening to consider what ground we've captured already. That we may be living in a golden age when it comes to these issues and not know it. Of course, when things get worse, we'll of course understand, oh, that was the golden age. But when you're in one, I suppose you might tend to take it for granted. But we really have had a spectacular amount of progress, not merely in one country, but in multiple countries. So if you were born today with a disability or acquire one, you're really entering a mix of opportunities that simply weren't there a generation back. And for this we should be grateful. But it's also important to remember that we are enjoying this not by accident, but because of all of the efforts that have gone into creating those opportunities, the social movements, one after another, that have converged on this question and made many of these things possible. So in this sense, that should encourage us because we know we can do that. We know that we can take a situation that's deprived and move it to one that's much more enriched. And that should give us confidence that you can bring about quite significant changes. And you don't have to wait generations to do it. That it can happen, within a lifetime in many cases. So I think what I'll do tonight is just simply touch on some of the catalysts for that in the community life, and then open it up for some kind of discussion on it. Now. Of course, the French expression that I found that in English we would say something like "to each his own." That when you think of real lives in the community, you're really not talking about the disabled. You're really talking about each person with a disability. So in a sense, there are many stories and many possibilities, but they all happen one person at a time. That each life, each person, you have to kind of get the drama down to the level of each person. Each person's life is a kind of journey towards some kind of fulfillment. When you look at it at that level, you realize that there is no such thing as the disabled or some such group. It's really different people having lives. And they happen to have a disability, but they were first and foremost ordinary people trying to find happiness and satisfaction in their world. If you think about the kinds of people and the worlds that we live in, there's all kinds of people having lives. So this is why we have to be a little bit careful not to generalize too much when we're talking about lives, because you really got to think about each person as a kind of both a challenge in this regard, but also the fulfillment of each life. We just have life lived under so many different kinds of conditions in communities that we really can't really equate one person's existence with another. They really are kind of interesting stories in themselves. So, in this sense, you begin with the fact that you're creating good lives one at a time. And the only way you'll know it's a good life is to know whether, in fact, for that person, it's a good life. Because there's no such thing as a good life in general. It's a good life because it suits that person in terms of what would make them happy, what would make them fulfilled. Just like your life isn't going to suit somebody else's, and somebody else's isn't going to suit you. It's really to find the life that fits that person, the life that would be most desirable for that person. And so in a sense, we're not creating a single life in the community. We're creating all kinds of different lives in the community because people are different. What they want to do with their lives are so different. And so it's unique lives, but unique and fulfilling lives. Because you can have a uniquely miserable life. And it is unique, it is individual, and it is miserable. So I don't think you came tonight to find out how to have a uniquely miserable life. You already have one, probably a lot of the time. So you're really looking for a uniquely fulfilling life. Because as I often say in my writings and teachings, you can disappoint people one at a time. You don't need to do it in groups. You can do it in a very personal, direct, specific way. Let people down, neglect them, and so on. And you could say, well, they have their life in the community, but they have a life that's unsuitable to them, and they're not happy with their life, and so on. So there would be different dimensions of getting this life. First of all, people aren't sure what is the life that they should live. It'd be nice if we were born knowing that. It would simplify a lot of things in life. But there's a great deal of discovery, searching, tasting, experimenting with life that needs to be recognized as the kind of search for a life. And that search may never end for people. That even when life has been good, things come along to change it, and there may need to be, again, another search for the good life. So in a sense, you might think of people of sequentially searching for the good life as circumstances may dictate. But then there's the acquiring of the roles and connections in community that fit that good life, get played out by the roles that then one takes on in community. So if you like, everybody's existence in community has its own pathways. And one pathway takes you in a quite different direction than another pathway. So in this sense, you find a life and then you establish a pathway or pathways that become, if you like, your lifestyle. And that then becomes an ongoing developmental process for people of developing a lifestyle proactively, again and again, in different departments almost of one's life. So if you think about it that way, you could see these as kind of loops that just keep looping around. Now, the unique stories of one person at a time then aren't written in advance. They get written through the volitional actions of people to make and create a life. And in many instances, people may not make a life at all. They may choose simply to drift. They may choose to simply succumb to whatever is around them. So in this sense, there's always the question of human freedom in the creating of a life that has to be taken into account, that people must choose life. And and not just the person with the disability, but the people in their life must choose life. And it's quite possible for people in people's life to choose lives that are not at all within the potential of the person. So in this sense, choice may be used to make very poor choices on behalf of people. And the history of people with disabilities is a history of people making very poor choices on behalf of people based on assumptions or beliefs about the person. So in this sense, there would be people then that aren't getting the life they could have had because of the kinds of choices that were made. And we also don't join in with community in a specific way. We join in with community in ways that make sense to the people themselves. So in this sense, when you join community, you don't join everything in community. You join in with the parts of community that seem appealing to you. So most people in this room have spent their life ignoring most of the community. You probably never thought of your life being that way. But you've really only tasted some of community because that was satisfying to you. In fact, most of community and community life you've had nothing to do with, probably, and have no interest in, and would dread being part of. And there'd be certainly lots of parts of community life I wouldn't want to be part of. And so in that sense, we got to remember that we're out there picking and choosing the pieces of community that really do suit us, appeal to us, that sort of thing. And a lot of this comes then from people's sort of existential agenda. What are they wanting to do with their life? What are their priorities? What are they focusing on, and so on? And again, people with disabilities themselves are making these decisions, but also other people around them. So in a sense, you should see this as not just the person choosing, but the person choosing in the context of all the pressures of the people in and around them. None of us are an island, but are rather influenced constantly by everybody in our lives. And so in this way, you really can't think of the person with the disability in a disconnected way. You know, you really have to think of them as embedded in whatever influences are in their lives, just like the rest of us aren't free agents that aren't being influenced and constrained by all the people around us. In fact, we are a product of all the people around us in that sense. But people do have their own purposes, they do have their own life interests, needs, and a way of making sense of life. So in the subjective sense, people actually are seeing the world quite differently from each other. You know, as you look out into the world, you're really not looking at it the same way other people are looking at it. You may be, in a sense, looking at it through the filter of whatever agenda that you do have already, in many instances, people don't know where their agenda came from. They just have always been drawn to particular things, but could never explain why they would be drawn to particular things, almost like they're inborn, almost a property of the soul more than a kind of reasoned thing. Oh, I've chosen to do this. It may simply be that you are very fond of this or fond of that, and that has been one of the anchors of your life. And people with disabilities are no different. They have a lot of inborn proclivities, or almost in a sense purposes that are inexplicable. You don't know why they would have those purposes, yet they would have those, just like everybody else. And so what people will seek in life then is a kind of interplay between who they are and what's out there in the world that might potentially interest them and engage them. For instance, how many people in this room hate sport? Yeah. And you may have work very hard at that over a lifetime, hating sport. But then you'd find people that love sport, and how can you explain it one way or the other? They're kind of deeply mysterious things, why one would like sport and the other one would hate it. Yet it's obvious some hate sport and some love it. And it's not like they went to I hate sports school and passed their I hate sports degree. It is probably inborn that it just does not light their fire, sport, and yet for somebody else it's magical. It's transcendent, it's glorious. But why is it so is really interesting to reflect upon. And in this sense, it's problematic for social determinants to think that there are things that weren't determined by society, but are determined by something unique in the character of people. And of course, in this sense, how could we be what we are before we're it? So you have to answer the question, where did that come from? It's a bit like the old, the cause that caused but was yet not caused, from Christian philosophy. Not all of community is of interest or value to a given person, so you're really looking for things in which there's a match between the person and the part of community that might interest them or might be a good fit for them. And this isn't always obvious for people, so a fair amount of trying on for size is really how people figure this out. A fair bit of trial and error as to where you fit. How many of you in this room can recall thinking something would be wonderful, then doing it, and then having second thoughts? Well, this is essentially trial and error, and yet it is what people often have to do because they don't know for sure whether something will work for them or might be interesting and so on. It's the same with relationships. Some relationships look good but end up not being so, and so on. So the tasting of life then is one of the things that helps people find their life, if you want to put it that way, is getting lots of things to taste. A surprising number of people with disabilities don't get a chance to taste life, that they have such limited things to taste that their true potentials can't be realized because they've not tasted enough to know that they hate things, or they like them, or they're indifferent, or whatever. So in this sense, it's a life not lived. If you don't taste and experience things, then your life will be restricted to the experiences you've had now. And what we find in many instances is that people understand life from the life that they've tasted. And so they don't know about the lives that they could yet have because they don't really have a sense of those lives that they could already or potentially have. So and the same for the people around them. So a lot of people think that people with disabilities are living a good life because their standard for what is a good life is narrow and limited, and they would think, oh well, it's a good life given what I know, and they don't know what they don't know. So in an imaginative sense, not everybody can imagine what they don't know. So in many instances, you almost have to force the issue. And I call this, in my teaching and writing, I call this imagining better. And it's the ability to enter into new realities and possibilities for people's lives intentionally, so that you can be sure that you're tasting life more fully, and eventually, of course, participating in life more fully. And there's a lot to be gained by having things taste badly. Tasting something and not liking it is a major victory. Because that's something you're not going to do again. That's helpful, because it then forces you, if I don't like this, then what do I like? So in a sense, even bad tasting, if you want to put it that way, is actually a kind of gift for life-building purposes. People are drawn to a particular life and can enjoy many things in life. So if you want to create a really good life in community, a real life in community, you start with what people have and are, not what they aren't. In a sense, with people with disabilities, people get very obsessed with what people with disabilities can't do. And that's sort of how people get defined. Oh, well, they can't walk, or they can't see, or they can't speak, or whatever. But it's completely useless information. The only thing that's really useful is what are you like? What would you enjoy? Because that's something you can do. What you would enjoy, what you would find interesting, what you're attracted to, these are things you can do something with. Whereas what you can't do, you can't do anything with. So it's useless. So I just tell people, don't worry about what people can't do, because they can't do it. We'll find somebody else to do it. What's really important is what can they do with their life? What can they enjoy with their life? And so you focus on that for life-building purposes, and you get tons of things then that you can work with. The kinds of things may start with things as simple as what's interesting to the person. For instance, what will the person simply pay attention to? If they show no interest, pay no attention to something, ignore it, that tells you something right then and there. But if something fascinates people and they're drawn to it inexplicably, then you really have the core ingredient for building on. For instance, if people, and I do find people like this, can't walk past a dog without saying how cute it is, and reaching down and scratching it and saying, and talking in a kind of cooing voice to the dog. And they do that, every 4 minutes, because it just never ceases to be a fantastic experience to like that dog. You're on to something. Because what's the good life is the next dog. That's really the good life. An endless parade of cute dogs. What do you do for enjoyment? I look for cute dogs. Because every dog fills me with joy. Every time they wag their cute little tails, my heart beats a little bit faster, And even when ugly dogs are cute, you know you're in deep doo-doo. Why? And so what is personal fulfillment? It's dogs. Because even though they're ugly, they're still cute to the person that loves dogs. And how many of you think that dogs might be, for some people, one of the anchors of their life? Yeah, my mother was like that. I was asking her in the hospital before she died, what do you miss most about being in the hospital? And she said, I miss my little house and my dog. Never mentioned the kids.
Priorities.
Priorities, yeah. My mother was very interesting because she always she had a series of dogs. She's a kind of serial dog person, or was. And every dog she had the same name. So she never got confused. So every dog we had was called Tippy. Now the first dog, Tippy, had a tip on its tail. It was some color, white or something. And even the dogs that didn't have it were now Tippy. So we used to call them Tippy 1, 2, 3. But the point is that dogs were a sustained source of enjoyment for my mother. And I use that as an example because that is a satisfying life. When you find things that sustain you, that are joyful, and they can be often very simple things. You have the beginnings of a lifestyle. And it could be, for other people, a walk in nature is the same as a cute dog. Or it may be sport, or it may be cooking, or it may be simply enjoying a kind of pastime. For instance, in my case, I've always loved reading. Even when I was a child at school, I would go to the school library and take out 10 books every week and finish them. My parents didn't know it, but I would stay up late at night, sort of reading under the blankets to get through the books, because reading was next to perfect as far as I was concerned, and sadly, I still do that. Because I've never failed to find the book I now need to read. It's like a hunger for reading that has never been satiated, and it has never disappointed me. Reading is just my version of cute dog. I've had interest in other cute things too, but that's another point. So these life interests may not be known or only partially and incompletely known by the person. So in this sense, there might be what could be thought of as manifest interests. These are ones that have already showed themselves a bit. But there can also be latent interests that have never been tapped into. And these can be discovered in life at any time. In life, you can discover things that are passionately interesting. But you might have gone 20, 30, 40 years never knowing you were passionately interested in that until that moment came when the latent interest now becomes manifest. So in this sense, it's very important to think of people as the people you can see, but then there's also the people that have not shown themselves yet. Otherwise, we are simply the person we are today, when in fact we're full of possibilities that have yet to manifest, yet to show themselves. So many people with disabilities are of course the same, that they have a whole kind of set of possibilities that have never shown themselves because life circumstances are not there to make those things possible. But once you put the circumstances there, it's almost like there's a new person here, because now another side of them can show itself. And so in this sense, we tend to look like the opportunities we've had. But when you change the pattern of opportunities people have, then you have, in effect, a new person in different dimensions and so on. So that's why many parents, when they see their family member in a totally different context, they see somebody they don't recognize. They literally say, well, this isn't the son or daughter I knew, because they would never do that when they were living with us. Something has changed. Well, it's not that they're different, it's that they're expressing more of themselves that are possible in new circumstances. So in that sense, life building can be incessant and in unexpected directions, because we actually don't know people's potential. So there'd be three kinds of potential in that regard. There'd be sort of potential that's shown itself and that we've done something with, then potential that we're aware of but have done very little with, and then hidden potential, which is unknown but should be presumed to be present. In other words, there should be a secret person you've never met inside of each person. In that sense, secret in the sense that it's not revealed, but really should be there, because that's true for all people, that there is layer upon layer of person inside us that has simply not shown itself. I often remember the example of Mother Teresa, who, of Calcutta, who, if you just looked at her life up to the age of 47, she wouldn't be the Mother Teresa of Calcutta that you now think you know. But she was Mother Teresa of Calcutta after she turned 47, because that's when she began that phase of her life. But it was part of her potential. It just manifested at 47. But if you'd looked at her earlier, she just seemed like an ordinary teaching nun in many ways. But if you went and looked at her life when she was 70, look back, you'd see the continuities between the early Mother Teresa and the later one. But you wouldn't necessarily have seen the later one as you were looking at, knowing the earlier one, if you know what I mean. just simply came out of sort of nowhere. So the exploring and discovering really helps draw out that potential. And one of the great sadnesses is that a lot of people don't do very much of that for and with people with disabilities. That there's a staggering number of people I know who live lives where one day is very much like the next. They get very few new opportunities in their life. The emphasis is on keeping them safe, cared for, and in empty lives, for fear that that they might be neglected. But the thing that ends up getting neglected is they'll be well cared for and have no life. And so you really need a balance. But when custodial concerns drive out developmental ones, then you have lives that are a shadow of what they could have been. So what you really want is developmental concerns to dominate custodial concerns, rather than custodial concerns dominate developmental ones. And of course you know what the story is for a lot of people's life. It's that they're cared for, but they have no life. Their life's really very, very limited. And you could say they're safe, but they really don't know what their potential is, and it hasn't revealed itself. There's a woman who was speaking with me. We did some workshops together in Australia, and her name's June. And the first 60, oh, I see what's happening. The most. Anyways, June. Get back to June. First 60 years of her life were horrible. She spent most of her adult life being abused essentially in boarding houses in the mental health system. I mean, very traumatic part of her life. And at about the age of 60, a couple of people came into her life who kind of rescued her from all that. They basically formed a little support circle around her, and they are still in that support circle around her. And but it was the beginning of the new June. And so when June presented with me in these workshops, she essentially didn't do like this kind of presentation. She really just had a PowerPoint that was really mostly pictures of people and what she was doing in her life. And her friend from the support circle essentially kind of just interviewed her as a way to kind of present this. And she's a very compelling speaker, June. But as you looked at her life was one image after another of the fulfilling things she's now doing with her life. And in her life would have been hundreds of people. By the time she was done her presentation, you saw the faces of hundreds of people that were in her life in a kind of positive, constructive, developmental kind of way. And you have to say that she just loved her life. And but that happened only after she was 60. And so if you'd looked at her at 59, you would have thought, what a tragic existence. But then when you get all this positive influence, it's like her life blossomed and she flourished. And it's important to remember that, because we have all these people who are under flourishing, who have a disability, because there is really no interest in this life expansion, life enrichment, life enhancement that makes it possible for people to flourish and to really just kind of do the unimaginable in many cases. But again, people aren't sure necessarily what they want to do with their life. So the more you try new things, the more you experiment, the more you taste, the more there is to work with. And if, for instance, if people did 2 or 3 new things every week, say you did 3 new things every week, at the end of the year, that's 156 new things that weren't there at the beginning of the year. And that's a better position to be in than to reach the end of the year and have 4 new things when you could have had 156. Do you see what I mean? It's not just a matter of numbers, but it is a matter of, is there additional things opening up constantly in people's life that might have some enduring value to them. It doesn't mean you should do 156 things a year, but it does mean that if you've done 156 things a year, you're going to find more of the things that are interesting, satisfying, and potentially may even be profound for you. Even one of those was kind of a really fantastic kind of thing in your life. Now, the thing is that people don't need to be left to do this on their own. That we can join up with people to create these kind of possibilities. This is what I would call sort of proactive lifestyle development, where, in a sense, you can partner with people to get a good life. But you really have to be very self-conscious that that's what you're doing, and essentially be very clear this is life building. We're building both a vision of a better, interesting, more satisfying life, and we're also creating the practical means by which we can achieve that. And people themselves can still stay in charge of their life, even if people are assisting. Many of us get kind of eager and take over people's lives, but you can really assist people and still leave them in the driver's seat. So in this sense, it's not, it doesn't have to be people imposing the good life on people. It can be people jointly helping to kind of find it. Now, people do have built-in appetites, interests, capacities, enjoyments in them that we don't know where they come from, but they would be there. But we do know if we go looking for them, we'll find them. So part of what people need are people that will look for those capacities in people, the strengths, the gifts, the passions, the interests, because if people look, they shall find. But when people believe there's nothing to look for, they don't look, and therefore they don't find. Many people with disabilities are surrounded by people that aren't looking for people's potentials, their capacities, their interests, and it shouldn't surprise us that they don't find them, and they don't do anything with them, because they haven't looked for them. And again, one of the things we do in my 10-day event, it gives you an idea how good this 10-day event is. That we all called it a 5-day event. So it's very memorable. But it was 5 days. 2 5-day blocks. Yeah. Anyways, just teasing, but people say this to me all the time. People say, "Oh, I went to hear you speak one time and it was great." And I said, well, I always ask, "Well, what did I speak on?" "Oh, I can't remember." But I had a good time. So that's good. In any event, people do have all kinds of innate things in them, and we constantly find them, even when the people that have known them for all their life had missed them. And we can find them in a relatively short period of time because we're looking, that's all. And when people don't look, they don't find. And so if the presumption should be the person you know isn't the person you know, that there's really a whole lot more there, you'd be surprised. There really is. And again and again, it's simply looking broadens the horizon of the people, because they see all kinds of things that people kind of enjoy and like. And as I said, you can do this at any point in life. You can look and still find things. Again, I was thinking of just the numbers of people that in their advanced years develop new passions, new interests, that they would never have thought of until then. So it seems to be if you're alive, there's a lot of still unexplored territory. Dead people, on the other hand, seem less responsive. But if you're alive, there's always the possibility of finding something you enjoy, even, sort of on the last day of your life. There's something about the human being that there is a kind of bottomlessness in terms of the capacity to engage and enjoy life. And yet many people act like they can't do that. That, they reach a point in life where they say, oh, I'm done living. So you get these 20-year-olds that act like they're 80-year-olds, and you get 80-year-olds that are living like they're 20-year-olds. And I kind of like the 80-year-olds living like 20-year-olds, rather than the 20-year-olds that aren't living, because they're really ignoring, the kind of scope of life. But we do need support to maximize this potential at times. And one support would be just people that push us and challenge us. A lot of times if it's just left to us, we'll just stay in whatever rut we're in. And that's why it's good to have people that push, challenge, cajole, persuade, threaten us, so that we actually get unstuck. And so it is with a lot of people with disabilities. There needs to be catalysts to support people to kind of do things, and often do things despite themselves, because all of us need some prompting at times to have a good time. For instance, I love live theater. Every time I go to live theater, I really enjoy it. But you got to drag me there, because on my own, I very rarely buy tickets. And yet, every time I go, I have a good time. And I just need someone who puts a gun to my head and says, enough of this, you're going to live theater, whether you like it or not. And then I go and I have a good time, and I'm grateful for the people that push me to do the things I actually enjoy, because I might not do them otherwise, Doesn't sound like you, does it? So you're not doing this alone. There is a soul there that is you can partner with. That the deep identity of the person is there, and you can work with that. Even if the person, for instance, is completely nonverbal, their soul's in perfect shape. So the very fact that they don't express themselves with words doesn't mean there's not a whole person emanating from that person that you can do something with. So this idea that should be that you're not alone. You can test ideas with people to see if you're on the right track. And even people that don't communicate with words will communicate in other ways, that they're having a good time, or they like this, or they hate that. So in this sense, if you're willing to say, we can be taught, if we're willing to be a student of the person, then people will guide us to a lot of things by their way they react to those kinds of things. So it isn't that we are in this kind of inventing this. We're really getting guidance constantly from people. Oh, I like this, I don't like this. This was enjoyable, this was whatever. People will give you feedback. Now, what you make of it's another thing altogether, but you'll get that. And so there should be the presumption that people have the capacity to be happy and enjoy life if the right things are there. And the presumption that that's true means that you can get satisfactory answers. And so many people that are considered difficult to serve or problematic and so on may simply be that way because the circumstances that make them agreeable are not present in their life. But once they get the circumstances that make them agreeable, then suddenly you're almost dealing like with a new person, because the person's content and satisfied. And a lot of misconduct and behavior is really just distress that people are showing because there's what they need is not present. in their current life circumstances. So when you get that, what you'll begin to see is things like satisfaction, contentment, enjoyment, cooperativeness, a lot of these things, because they're getting what satisfies them. A bit like if you were really hungry and nobody got it, that you need to eat. You know, after a while you get pretty cranky with them. But if you eat and you really enjoyed eating, suddenly you'd be good to be around because you're nice and satisfied, your stomach's full, you had a great meal, and you'd be acting satisfied because you got what you needed. You know? So lots of people aren't living up to their potential, and they're not living up to their potential because people have low expectations for their potential. And low expectations are pervasive, and we do not have a problem of overly high expectations of people with disabilities. We're almost always underestimating people and what they can enjoy in life. And so you can almost, in every instance, just presume we're underestimating people, that our expectations are set too low. Because every expectation has been essentially broken again and again and again in people's life, and we could probably be doing hugely better than we're doing because our expectations are still too low. For instance, I've been in some jurisdictions where 7 out of 10 people with disabilities are employed at regular jobs in the community. And yet I go to many other places in the world where 2 out of 10 are working. And you know then that 50% of the people that aren't working could be working. You know, given what we know already, and 70% may not be the ceiling. That may be the highest comparatively, but next year maybe 72%, you see what I mean? So the expectations should just be presumed to be ridiculously low and undemanding of people. For instance, the number of people that people expect that they couldn't do things for themselves, who actually can do all kinds of things for themselves. You know, they can do all kinds of things, and yet they're seen by people as not being able to do all kinds of things. Time and again, that's demonstrated to be not true, And so one of the things that comes then with getting a good life in the community is actually surprises. That life is full of surprises and new developments in people's life. And then the more you push the horizon, the greater the number of surprises. Just the number of ways that people can do things that and enjoy things that nobody would ever have guessed is an amazing thing. And just how many times people don't behave like the psychologists say they're going to behave, or their parents say they're going to behave, and other people, they really do surprise us, and surprise themselves even. So this is why we shouldn't be so certain that we know things will happen or not happen. We should be much more ready to be completely surprised by what people will do. And of course, once you do have lots of growth and personal development, then it has additional benefits beyond the growth itself. Because, for instance, if you do get a job, jobs have all kinds of other benefits besides personal growth and development. But they do come about, that jobs really can be a life changer for a lot of people. So in this sense, it's almost like a war about, is this going to be a life we waste, or is this going to be a life that we don't waste? And this is the question. Depending on what we do, we'll waste a life, and depending on what we'll do, we'll satisfy the possibilities of that life. If people had that as a kind of moral concern, then we'd have very different outcomes. Because if it's unconscionable to waste a life, then living a life below its potential is wasting a life. Living a life in a much too narrow way is wasting a life. And so on. You're going to struggle then with is this wasting people's life? And people are going to err on the side, if they are conscionable people, they're going to err on the side of not wanting to waste their life, but rather to see that life as much fulfilled in terms of its potentials as possible. Now, you need roles in the community to do this. You not just need to be in the community, you need to be in positive roles in the community that allow you to enjoy the things of community life, take advantage of them, and so on. And when you're segregated, you're not in community life, you're outside of community, looking at community from the outside in. You're not in community, and you're not playing a role in community. And substantial numbers of people with disabilities are mostly segregated. If you added up the total hours of their life, and you look at the total hours in socially inclusive, valued social roles, they're quite minuscule, actually. Most people spend most of their time in a segregated setting with other people who are disabled as well. And you just got to look at the total hours of people's life. You realize just how many people really are in the community, but in a segregated place in the community. You know, they get up in the morning at segregated house, they take segregated transport to segregated day custody centers, and they come home from that to segregated leisure programs, and then to special this and special that, and wrap up the day with return to a segregation house, and then everybody calls that community living, but it's avoiding community by constantly spending time in segregated settings. So what's the key then? The key is really the valued social roles, and you can't get valued social roles in segregated settings. You can only get them out where ordinary people are, and in the multitude of places people are. For instance, this little slide that's up there is really a choir. People getting together to sing, and there are people with disabilities that like to sing. So why are they singing in the disabled special singing blah blah when there's thousands of hundreds of choirs and groups where people get together to sing? Because if you're in the valued social role of choir member, then you get to sing, which is enjoyable, but you also get the standing of being an ordinary person, a fellow choir mate, things like that. And that then could be a very nice part of your life. If you look forward to your Thursday evening choir time, that could be one of those life satisfactions that never goes away. In other words, for years to come, you like being in your choir. And you're in a valued role, and you're getting an experience in life that isn't just singing, it's singing in the context of being part of a community. So these roles are pathways, really. Once you get the role, you get a life. That's the role equals a life. All these roles have a life associated with them. For instance, if you're a supporter of a particular sports team, then a whole lifestyle comes with supporting a sport team. Not necessarily in every instance, but in Australia, people define themselves by the Aussie Rules football team that they support. And it's like a life-defining thing, And so once people find out that you're not supporting a particular team, then they don't like you, and things like that, And so it's a whole part of being in community, is who you support. And so the role of being a supporter of a particular team is kind of like your life. It's part of, it's a part of your life, and it's a significant part of your life. Much like which religion you belong to used to matter to people. I'm a member of a particular church. These days it's less important, but whatever the role, it creates a life with it. So roles and lives are interchangeable, these valued social roles, because each valued social role brings you all kinds of experiences that you might like. So it's through these roles that we really know community and taste community and become satisfied by community. Particularly if the roles are ones that suit us, then we have satisfying experiences in community because we found roles that position us in community in ways that are agreeable to us. And of course we can always find roles that don't suit us, and there's no great difficulty with that because you simply give them up after a while because they don't suit you. But in the process you realize, oh, it didn't suit me, you know, and that'll be helpful along the way. And the valued social roles, which are the roles of things like being a client, being sort of a member of a group that society looks down upon and so on, those roles don't get you a life. They almost become the justification for not having a life. So they're death. The valued social roles are death because they deprive people of life and they don't enrich life because people then don't expect you to have a life. Again, I was talking today about people with leprosy in some countries. The minute you get leprosy, your life's over. Even though you're treated and you're healed of leprosy, socially you're dead. And you live as a beggar for the rest of your life because the role of leper has all those connotations, and they're ancient, and it's very hard for societies to overcome them. But you don't have that problem with valued social roles. All valued social roles have life-giving components to them. So when you have a role, it gives you something in life. And it was very interesting. I was just in India with I'm very close to a lot of Tibetan people and whatnot, and I've spent a lot of time with Tibetans there and elsewhere. And one of the things you see is that if you're an old Tibetan, you're never alone because they don't abandon old people. Like in the West, a lot of old people are abandoned. But in Tibetan culture, you do not do that. They have a role of high esteem in the lives of people, and people have a great sense of obligation to old